Hello, I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which is my quarterly bookish bracket video. So this is for Q3, so the books that I read in July, August, and September. I know I'm a little bit late, but better late than never, right? So if you're new to my channel, welcome, hello, hi, and please, if you do like this video, be sure to subscribe because it helps this little channel grow. But essentially, the only type of bracket I could ever do as someone who knows zero zilch goose eggs about sports is a bookish bracket. So every quarter I do a bracket where I try to decide what my favorite read of that quarter was. And so I'll go a little bit more into the process momentarily, but the first little bit of this video is always some statistics. So if you're a data nerd, you're gonna love this part. So why don't we dive right in? Alright, so for the first portion, as I just said a second ago, we talk stats. What did my reading diet look like for those 3 months that I'm talking about? And over the course of the 3 months, I read 22 books, which is down just slightly from what I read in Q2 and in Q1 of this year, but the breakdown was 15 fiction and 7 nonfiction, which is significantly better than what I did in Q2. I think I had 2 nonfiction books. Now we're looking at 1/3 of what I read having been nonfiction, which I am pretty pleased with. But if we break that down a little bit further by genre, we're looking at 8 different genres in total that I read. So we read 2 contemporary fiction, 2 romances, 3 historical fictions, 5 nonfiction, 2 graphic novels / graphic biographies. In this case, they were both graphic biographies. 3 literary fictions, 4 translated works, and then 1 mystery, which isn't too shabby. Breaking it down a little bit further, if we look at the format, I read 16 physical books and then 6 audiobooks, and no surprises, no ebooks here. That's not a reading experience that I enjoy, so I tend to avoid it. Now, though, we start talking about the stars, and this is what goes into the book bracket. So basically what ends up happening is that any books that I gave 5 stars to are the ones that end up in the bookish bracket. And then once I get into the bookish bracket, I have criteria that I've been working with throughout the year to help me try to whittle it down. And we'll get into that momentarily. But as for stars, I had 6 5 stars, so those are going to be the ones that you'll see momentarily, 5 4 stars, 4 3.5 stars, 6 3 stars, and only 1 DNF. And that's pretty good if you look at the average of this, which of course I didn't average out before sitting down to film this video. It's not too shabby. More than half the books, or about exactly half of the books, were 4 stars or higher. So I really can't complain there, and for me, a 3 star isn't that bad. It just means it was okay, but it's probably not a book that I'm going to gush about effusively, or a book that I'm necessarily going to read again. I might attempt another book by the author. I didn't hate it, essentially. It's just okay. But now we're in the bookish bracket phase of this video, which always gives me a little bit of anxiety because I basically try to talk through my process. And picking a favorite book for a bibliophile is like asking a parent to pick their favorite child. It's near impossible. Like, you can't do it. They are all your children, and you love them all, so it's very hard. It makes me sweat. I babble. The 6 books that we're going to be talking about today for this bookish bracket are Still Life with Meredith by Anne Lewinson, which was a very trippy, very literary novella. Then we have Circe by Madeline Miller, which everyone I think knows about at this point, and it's just a crowd favorite, but it is a historical fiction that Noelle from Noelle 7 Pages described as being written kind of like a memoir, and it is. That's the best way to describe it, of the witch Circe, who features in the epic Greek poem, the Odyssey. So that's another one. Then we have The Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich, which won a Nobel Prize and is an oral history of the women who were living in Russia during World War II. And I can tell right off the bat that some of my subscribers who know me well are probably going to be putting their money down on this book. The other two books that were my favorites were also focused on Russia. Then we have another, like, book social media favorite, Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, which is a contemporary romance that I absolutely adored. Then there is Drums of Autumn by Diana Gabaldon, which is the fourth book in the Outlander series, which I have been slowly making my way through this year. And then lastly, we have Isa's Ballad by Magda Szabo, and this is a translated work from Hungary, and it is about a mother-daughter relationship and kind of the generational differences of old world versus new. So those are kind of my, like, little elevator pitches on those books. But those are the ones that we're going to be focusing on at this point, trying to get to my favorite book of Q3. Honestly, I don't know why I do this. I am such a glutton for punishment. This stresses me out so much. But the first criteria that I use always is to remove rereads, and I do this for a couple of reasons. The first is that I am not a person who hates rereads. Like, there are too many books out in the world for me to waste my energy doing that. So if I reread a book, it's probably because it's one of my favorite books. It's a book that I really, really, really enjoyed. And that feels a little bit like putting your foot on the scale, as it were, in a situation like that. Or this, rather. So I do like to remove them. However, this time around, all of the books are new reads for me, so this does nothing to help me. And to be honest, it doesn't help me all that often, but I still feel like it's a criteria that I need to have. So, we're still with the 6 books. The next criteria is to ask myself, would I read another book by this author? And for me, that is a sure sign that I enjoyed something if I instantly go to their backlist or check to see if they have new releases, because I am a creature of habit. So when I do find an author that I really enjoy, I'm going to read all the books that I can by them. So this does prove very useful in the course of this book bracket, let me tell you. So we have Still Life with Meredith by Anne Lewinson, and this is a really strange book. I read it in one sitting. It's, I want to say, 100 pages roughly. I think it might be a little bit more or a little bit less, and it is very, very strange. The premise is that the main character is living with this artist who is very, like, avant-garde, like, does some really strange art, but her roommate is not there currently, and so she's basically waiting for her roommate to return. She's watching their cat. She talks a lot about Dutch still life. She talks a lot about this psychoanalyst Marie Bonaparte and her quest for, like, sexual fulfillment. She talks a lot about her own sexual exploits, and it's very weird. It is not a straightforward book at all. So with her, I feel like, I think this is a debut from what I remember. I don't think there are any other full-length works by Anne Lewinson out there right now. I think maybe I would be interested, but I also think that it would probably depend on the subject matter. Like, is it something that's more commercial? Is it, again, something that's kind of very experimental in tone like this? So I'm kind of maybe here. So we're gonna leave Still Life while we talk through the other books and say that this is a maybe. So I haven't made a decision with this one. Then we have Circe by Madeline Miller, which I absolutely loved this book. I was so worried going into it because of all of the hype around it, and hype generally gives me hives. Like, I have an averse reaction to hyped books in most cases. This was really kind of an exception to that rule, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought the writing was very beautiful. I thought Circe as a character was phenomenal, because for me this was very much the coming of age story of Circe. Basically from the moment she is born, or whatever you say a god or goddess is, like through her hundreds of years, coming into contact with Odysseus and Daedalus and her relatives who are gods and goddesses and half gods and goddesses, her children, her child rather, and embracing motherhood, coming to embrace her own sort of magic as a witch and all that entails. It was really a truly phenomenal story, and I really enjoyed it. The thing is, though, the other book by Madeline Miller that's out there, Song of Achilles, is one that I'm not as drawn to, but I am less drawn to the story of Achilles and Patroclus than I am to Circe, and that's just like a personal preference thing. A lot of the times the stories that I read, the stories that I enjoy, are stories about female characters, about women and their experience. So that's kind of why I'm hesitant with that one. But also, I do feel like The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker touched on Achilles and Patroclus, and that was enough for me. The story there, though, focused more on Briseis, who was like a slave to Achilles. So this one, too, is a little bit of a maybe, because yes, I would read things by Madeline Miller, but I don't know that I'd read Song of Achilles. So moving on to Unwomanly Face of War by Svetlana Alexievich. This is interesting because I think, which I only realized after I had read this book, probably sometime last year or maybe the year before, Olive from over at A Book Olive had mentioned this book on women or stories in, I want to say in the Soviet Union, so communist Russia. Hold on, let me find the name of it. Hold on, we're gonna find the name. Secondhand Time, The Last of the Soviets by Svetlana Alexievich. So this is an oral history of the disintegration of the Soviet Union and the emergence of New Russia. So I had seen Olive mention this on her channel. Olive loves Russia and the subject in general too, and I put it immediately on my Goodreads at the time, but I haven't bought it yet, haven't looked for it, and it was after I read Unwomanly Face of War that it clicked that this is the same author. So yes, I definitely want to read books by this author. This one in particular sounds really interesting. This would be a little bit new territory for me with this book, but I am intrigued. I also like this oral history format that Svetlana Alexievich has going on. So this one is a yes. So far we have one yes. Then we have Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert, and that is also a yes. I mean, at this point, I have now read all 3 of the Brown sister books, and I absolutely loved them and would really love to see what Talia Hibbert comes out with next. I loved the fact that these books were so diverse. You have characters who are BIPOC, you have characters with mental illness, you have characters dealing with chronic illness, and it was just really nice to see characters who felt like normal people, and even like their body types aren't like the model-esque individuals. They are people and they feel real and authentic, and I loved that, and that seems to be very much a part of like Talia Hibbert's ethos in her writing of romance novels. So I would very much love to see what she produces next. I think she has some books that she wrote before this, which I definitely want to check out. The covers, from what I remember, aren't as cute as the Brown sister ones, but don't judge a book by its cover, am I right? Sometimes. Maybe. So there. So those are 2 yeses. Drums of Autumn by Diana Gabaldon. So this is a yes because, I mean, I'm reading them currently. So Drums of Autumn was book 4. I've since read book 5. I'm nearly done with book 6 and plan to read book 7, 8, and 9 before the end of the year. So just based on that alone, the answer is yes. And now we have the last one, which is Isa's Ballad by Magda Szabo, and this is also a yes. I mean, Magda Szabo is now among one of my favorite authors. I read her first book last year, and I read another one in, I don't even remember what month, but I read it earlier, and actually that one, Abigail, was in my Q2 book bracket. So honestly, is it possible? Hold on, hold the phone. Elias, I'm holding the phone. But I think, which would be very, very new for me, I want to say that all 3 of these books might be 5 stars. All 3 Magda Szabo books? Yeah, that rarely happens. All 3 of the Magda Szabo books that I've read were 5-star reads for me. That is like unheard of. She's pulled a hat trick in my estimation. So what I love about these books is that they are very quiet, sort of character-driven stories, which are some of my favorite. I would say that these are books that not a ton happens, but the depth of the emotions that the characters go through, the study of human nature, which I know sounds like very woo, but it's just so poignant and feels so real and so just beautiful in a way. And Isa's Ballad was no different for me. This was very much a book that was about this mother-daughter relationship, but it was also about what happens to someone who is aging, and it's very much this look at old world Hungary, like Imperial Austro-Hungarian Hungary, versus new Hungary, which is communist, and that was interesting for me as well. And actually, I think I do own another one of her books already. I think it's Catlin Street, maybe, and I think there are a couple others that have been translated into English, so yes, I definitely want to read her books still. So Catlin Street, I'm sure you will see on a TBR in the near future. So, I mean, we have 4 books for sure that we know are staying. And we have two maybes with Still Life and with Circe. I think I'm going to keep Circe because I never want to say never with Song of Achilles, even though I'm not necessarily as drawn to that particular story. And if I look at these two authors, I feel like I'm more inclined to pick up that than I would probably be to pick up something else by Anne Lewinson. And that's not because I didn't enjoy it. Obviously it was a 5-star read, but I feel like Anne Lewinson with Still Life might be like one of those roller coasters, like those really terrifying ones, you know, with multiple loop-de-loops. You go upside down, you have the really, really high climb, and then the really, really steep drop that makes you think you're descending into hell. I feel like it's a little bit like that, where you do that roller coaster once, and then you probably don't ever need to do it again, but you could, but you probably don't want to, at least not right away, because it was a bit weird even for me. And like I said, it really would depend on what any future books of hers were on for me. It would really be dependent on that. So we'll say Still Life is out. We'll keep Circe because while Song of Achilles doesn't speak to me currently, like I said, never say never. I might cave and read it, or I might just wait for Madeline Miller to come out with something else. So, okay, so we're down to 5 now. The next criteria that I use is gut feeling, and this kind of comes halfway through. I really have six criteria, and I use this at the beginning, and sometimes I need to use this at the end if my questions have failed me. So with a gut feeling, it is what it says on the tin. It is a gut feeling, and I don't know. We need to think through this. We're gonna talk. We're gonna try to rationalize this, even if it is a gut feeling. Okay. If I had to go with a gut feeling here, and my gut isn't yelling at me, so this is a little hard. If I was going with a gut feeling, I think we'll drop Drums of Autumn. I really enjoyed this particular book in the Outlander series. I think apart from the first book, Outlander, the original, this is the only one that I have given 5 stars to. But I would say that the magic of Outlander is in book 1. There is something about that book that made it one of my most loved books of all time. That book, and I want to say even book 2, have something. This was a really enjoyable installment with the world expanding. I mean, you still have Jamie and Claire and their relationship, and I love that you have Jamie and Claire aging. I think that is so beautiful because you don't have a lot of characters in fiction that are middle age or older. It's fiction kind of gives you the impression that life ends after your 30s, that nothing can happen to you, that you can't have a great love. And this book continues to show their love as they mature, which is beautiful, but you also see them as a family with Brianna and with their grandson and with Fergus and Marcelly, who've basically been adopted into their family, and those children who also consider Jamie and Claire grandparents, and life on the ridge with this war looming ahead of them that they know they can't prevent, and don't actually want to prevent. So there is something nice about it, but it's still not quite the same as Outlander 1. So with my gut, I'm going to say that this probably wasn't my favorite book of the quarter. That's what we're going with there. Moving on before I change my mind. So then next we have this question, which I love, which is, did the book make me think? And I feel like this is such a good question because it addresses two things. It addresses, did it make me think in the sense that, like, is this a book that I haven't stopped thinking about? And for me, that is the sign of a really good book. When months have passed and I still, like, think back to something that I read, or that, like, I'll suddenly remember an emotion the book evoked, or I'm still continuing to gush about it on my channel and recommend it to everyone and their mother. So that's the type of thinking that it addresses in my head. And also, like, did I learn something? And to me, I know that's really important, and I don't mean like learn facts necessarily, although sometimes that is the case, but a lot of the time I'm like, has it taught me anything about a different perspective or culture or time period? Like, has it made me think about something that I might not have thought about before? And this is something that both fiction and nonfiction can do, so that's why I also think this is a really good question. With Cersei, this is, for the first part, like, have I stopped thinking about this book? No. I continue to think about it all the time. I mean, I thought about it so much to the point that I actually went and picked up a physical copy of the book because I had listened to it as an audiobook, and I really want to reread it and, like, annotate the hell out of it. I honestly have not stopped thinking about it. I think I've spoken about it quite a few times on this channel already, and it was just a treasure. Like, it exceeded all expectations for me. So I do think that, yes, it is a book that I'm continuing to think about, but I also think that there is something very feminist in the story and perspective of Cersei's that is really nice, especially given the, like, setting. This is ancient Greece, but there's something very feminist in her and the way that she approaches life and motherhood, and in the way that she grows and matures. As I said, this to me feels very much like a coming of age story, so I do think there is something there. But as I said, this is a book that I haven't stopped thinking about. And the same thing could be said for Unwomanly Face of War. I mean, this was also another book that I listened to an audiobook, which I think was such a good way to experience this book, because it is an oral history, so actually sitting down and listening to these stories be told, you kind of get the feeling that you, your grandmother, your mother, and your aunts are sitting around a table, all with cups of coffee or tea, and they're just, like, telling you stories of the good old days. Like, it gave you that sense. And I honestly haven't stopped thinking about what these women went through. But I think the, like, beauty of this book is that it in no way glorifies war. Like, the stories that are told are the stories that are dark and gruesome and violent and sad and bleak, and that's the reality of it. Like, they don't sugarcoat things that these women experienced. The injuries they endured, the graying of the hair prematurely when they're teenagers or in their early 20s, the like sudden stoppage of their period because of the stress they were under, the conditions they were living in, how cold, how dirty, how sick or ill they might have felt. And that's not something that you see a lot. I watch a lot of war movies, watch a lot of war-focused documentaries, but sometimes they feel like they glorify war and violence, and the like shots that you see are kind of gratuitous. This didn't feel at all like that. This again just felt very, very real, very, very frank. But it also talks about some of the like wonderful things they experienced, the camaraderie with the other women. Some of these women found love on the fronts, and there is beauty there as well. So not to make you think that this book is all sadness and violence and that sort of thing. There is also beauty present in it as well. So it did definitely make me think about the wartime experience of women in a way that I haven't necessarily thought. Some of these women were snipers, some of them were partisans, some of them were like spies, and like they were heavily involved in the conflict itself. So definitely yes there. Take a hint, Dani Brown. I feel like this is a maybe. I honestly haven't stopped thinking about this particular book because, as I said in my September and October wrap-up, which I think will have been posted by the time this one is, like, there's something about Dani that resonates with me. Like, there's a kinship there. She's a character that speaks to me on a certain level, and I really enjoyed that. But, like, if I were thinking about the Brown sister books, honestly, the one that made me think the most would probably be Eve Brown, because of the way that that book addresses autism and being on the spectrum. The way that it explores mental health and mental illness was really interesting to me, and also knowing that Talia Hibbert herself is autistic gave it a whole other sort of level. But I wouldn't say that Dani Brown had that same impact on me. And I'd even say with like Chloe Brown, because of the chronic illness and fibromyalgia, that had a little bit of that too. I didn't feel as much of it here, even though I enjoyed this story so much. So this is a maybe for now. And then we have Isa's Ballad, which I'm gonna go with yes, and that's because this book, as I said, it was about a mother-daughter relationship, but it's really about the mother, Eddie. And she is an older woman in this book, and she is very lost. And a lot of this book is addressing her kind of not knowing where she now fits, because this is a woman who had been a wife and a mother for so much of her life. She no longer has those two people to help her form an identity. And her daughter moves her from everything that she knows, from the house she knows, from the town she knows, from the people she knows, and moves her into the city. And once again, she's kind of lost and displaced, in the sense that this is a woman who is very, very superstitious and who is afraid of technology and has probably lived in very small towns her entire life. So like living in an apartment with electronics and like busy streets outside, she's completely overwhelmed. And it's really this like, what happens at this stage in your life when basically you're at the end of your life. What happens now? Where do you fit? What is your contribution to society as a whole? Can you contribute? And it asks these questions through this character, and it's very sad in a way, but it's also one of these things that I feel like isn't talked about enough at all. And that's also why I liked the fact that this is a character who is older, more mature in this book. So it made me think about aging and what aging means in society, definitely. And it didn't give me answers to it necessarily, and kind of made me feel a little bit sad, but it definitely made me start to ruminate on that a little bit more. So I mean, if we're looking at these books, the one that I'm not 100% sure about is Danny Brown. So I do think in this case that one is gonna go. Next criteria is character magnetism. And this doesn't mean that the characters are likable, because unlikable characters have their time and place, and they can be very fun to read about. No. This, if I had to describe it, and as I've described it before, is more a situation of like, if I were hosting a dinner party, would I want to invite the main characters to the table? Do I think that they would have interesting things to say, stories to contribute? Do I think their personality would be really fun at a party? That's the best way I think I can describe it. And so if we look at the books that are remaining, you have Cersei, who absolutely yes. Because I think just from like the standpoint of she is a goddess and a witch, but the fact that she has lived through hundreds of years and the stories she could probably tell, and there is something about her personality that is really compelling to me. But I do think just because of the like wealth of knowledge that she could share, like I would, as a history person, talking to her would be a real treat. Also, I do really love the witchy things, so I would probably interrogate her on all of that. Like, I just know that. Unwomanly Face of War is a bit weird for this question, admittedly, because it's not as if this book has a main character. Svetlana Alexievich interviewed, I want to say, hundreds of women to create this book over the course of years. Like, she traveled around Russia to gather these stories, and so it's not focused on any one woman. It's dozens of women and their stories. And yes, there are certain stories that definitely still stick out to me more than others. But there isn't like an individual character or focus there. So this one's tricky and a maybe, because I don't know. And then with Isa's ballad, Isa is not a likable character. I don't necessarily like how she treats her mother. But that being said, she's interesting, but I don't necessarily know that I would want her at a dinner party. And Eddie is Eddie is endearing with all of her superstitions and her quirks. But again, I don't know that I would want her at a dinner party. Like, I feel like she would be kind of a Debbie Downer because she would probably freak out at all the technology around, and like she's a sweet old lady and I love that, but I don't know that I would want her at a dinner party. So that would be a no. You have Cersei with a yes, and a Womanly Face of War with a maybe, because I don't like, because not one character, a cast, an ensemble of real life women. And as I said, there are specific women's stories that definitely stick out to me. It's one of the reasons I want a physical copy of the book, because this is another one that I want to reread and like annotate the hell out of it. And if I was someone who was going to like write, say, a novel, taking inspiration from one or multiple women in this book might be in the cards. So I do have a no here, a maybe, and a yes. So we'll get rid of the no, which is Isa's Ballad, and we're left with Unwomanly Face of War, which I know everyone has their money on that one, and also Cersei, which to me is the shocker, because like I said, hyped books and I don't normally get along. But here we are with the last two books, Cersei and Unwomanly Face of War. So the last criteria that I use is one that probably in 2022 I need to rethink it a little bit, because it works for like a novel, but it's a little bit harder for nonfiction, and I've come across this before in Q2, and here we are again with a similar situation. But the criteria is the book transportive or immersive? And like I said, this is easy with a novel. Like, a novel transports you to a new world, whether it's fantasy or like a historical setting or contemporary, but like within the universe of those characters. But that's not necessarily the intent of nonfiction, or it doesn't always have to be. I think it works a little bit better with like memoir, maybe, because it's trying to put you in someone else's shoes. But it's difficult with nonfiction, and that was the same problem I had in Q2. So for consistency this year, we're keeping it, but 2022, that one's gonna have to be rethought, I think. But I don't know. And this, with Cersei, this might be because I listened to it as an audiobook. I mean, you're definitely in this world of Cersei, especially when she's on the island. But I feel like I've definitely felt more immersed, more transported, more like in the thick of it with other books than with this one. But I did really enjoy Cersei, the character. And so I don't know if that's because I listened to it, and the reading experience for me when I listen to something versus when I physically read it is a little bit different. I do find that I am more engrossed as a reader of a physical book in general. With Unwomanly Face of War, which again I listened to as an audiobook, it's interesting because this is actually a book that maybe didn't transport me to that specific time and moment in history, but it definitely had an emotional impact on me. This was a book that made me cry listening to it. This is a book that made me angry, that shocked me, and so on that emotional level, like, if you compare the two books, I got more of an emotional experience from Unwomanly Face of War than I did with Circe. Although Circe definitely had some moments that made me teary, but like emotionally, my connection was more so with Unwomanly Face of War than with Circe. Certainly, one of these books had more of an impact. And, I mean, maybe in 2022, this question has to be more about the emotional side of things with a book. Maybe. So that's food for thought. But, am I happy with that answer? I think so. I think so, which means that basically, if any of you put money that Unwomanly Face of War was going to be my favorite book of Q3, then collect those greenbacks. Collect those dollar bills, because I think my favorite book of Q3 was Unwomanly Face of War. But Circe is a very close second. I feel like tomorrow I could totally change my mind and go through this whole process, and the answer could be Circe, to be quite honest. But for today, before I change my mind, because that could happen and I could take it back in a second. Quick, let's wrap this up. I do think that favorite book is going to be Unwomanly Face of War, which means that I am a truly predictable person at this point. And also means that I really should not read any potential 5-star books on Russia, because now all 3 books are Russia. The first was Marina M. Then we had Catherine the Great, the biography. And now we have Unwomanly Face of War. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, that is very on brand for me, not gonna lie. We all know I love Russia. So, yeah. So yeah, that's it. That's the final answer. Unwomanly Face of War for Q3. So I'm sorry if you bet against that book. My sympathies, my condolences, but that's my answer, at least for today. But I really do hope that you enjoyed this video with me talking through some of my favorite books from the last few months and trying to decide which one was my ultimate favorite. I do have obviously one more quarter to go this year, and at the end of that one, I will try to put the 4 favorites head to head and decide what the favorite book of 2021 was. I have no idea how I'm going to do that or what those criteria are going to be. It might just have to be like a gut feeling there, but we'll decide on a number 1. Already that's making me sweat. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, and as I said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, be sure to give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe, because it helps this little channel grow, and it means the world to me. So I will see you next time. Bye!